All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Mythgard Academy. And Arthur, am I ready for Mythmoot? I am getting ready for Mythmoot. I've got my talk all prepared. That might not seem like saying very much, but if you knew any more about how I operate, the fact that I have my talk all prepared like a full week in advance shows you how far ahead of the game I am when I'm thinking about Mythmoot here. Hey, I've got my costume ready too, Arthur. Yeah, no, I'm ready. I'm set to go. It's going to be good. It's going to be fun, Arthur. Looking forward to your talk. A quick reminder for those of you who aren't able to join us in person at Mythmoot this year, and I'm sorry if you can't, and hope maybe you'll be able to make it in a future year in person. Nevertheless, there's still time to sign up for Mootcast, so I strongly encourage you to do that. I strongly encourage you to sign up for Mootcast. You can sign up for it through the end of the conference, but not thereafter. So you still have like a week and a half, basically. But of course, we're going to start festivities on Thursday. That'll be fun. So please do. Remember to sign up for Mootcast so that you can join us at least virtually, even if you can't be there in person. So anyway, that is going to be super fun. So can't wait for Mythmoot next year. Next week, of course, is what I'm actually thinking of. Ooh, okay, right. Anyhow, one other quick announcement that I wanted to make, sort of a housekeeping announcement for Mythgard Academy. So I've been conferring with the Mind of Meadow and Wheels, Ed Powell, who has been helping run the elections and everything for Mythgard Academy for years now. And we've come to an executive decision between the two of us. So it's taken us a while to pick up on this, but after some careful observation and detailed analysis, we've noticed a trend, and we're suspecting at this point that the trend very likely to continue. We're asking ourselves, what are the odds that Morgoth's Ring does not win the next election, right? And actually, it's kind of complicating things. We wanted to sort of simplify things a little bit. So we decided at this point, 9 volumes in to the history of Middle-earth, and having voted the next volume of the history of Middle-earth every time for the last 4 years, we're going to go ahead and make that official, because it's actually going to simplify things greatly. And there have been some people, for instance, who have been, anyway, never mind, people who have been voting differently because they're presuming that the next volume is gonna win and everything. So anyway, it's gonna make things simpler. So here's what we're gonna do. We're going to presume that our next 3 Tolkien books are going to be volume 10, 11, and 12 of the history of Middle-earth. Which means for the next election, so instead of voting on the next 2, one of which is 99% guaranteed to be Morgoth's Ring, we're just gonna hold an election for the interstitial book, right? So the next book that we do after Sauron Defeated is still up in the air, right? And after that, we'll definitely plan to do Morgoth's Ring. So we just wanted to kind of formalize that, right? So I mean, unless there's some kind of public outcry, unless there were some of you who were planning to, go out there and rally the vote against Morgoth's Ring, and which, by the way, I couldn't scarcely comprehend, as Morgoth's Ring is the one that contains the Athrobeth of Finrod and Andreth, which is one of the coolest things Tolkien ever wrote. So, anyway, yeah, that's Nancy, I've been really looking forward to that one too. So yeah, so I totally think that we're gonna do that. So I think if anything, it should really just kind of simplify the voting for the books in the middle. We'll be doing nominations just for the one book, and we'll be doing doing the elections for that, of course, and then we'll do that. Then we'll do Morgoth's Ring. Then we'll do an election for the next one. So anyway, that's small procedural change. In practice, it's not going to really change anything, but it will greatly simplify the voting process, which is getting complicated. We're kind of reviewing this, and Ed was pointing out to me, he's like, do you realize how many people are in the Council of the Wise now? And I'm like, that is an awesome and amazing thing. Awesome and amazing to reflect on the levels of generosity of folks, to think that we have now several hundred people who are donating to Signum University $100 or more a year. Is just such a wonderful, testament to the generosity and dedication of our people. But of course, it on the other end is such a wonderful thing, but on the other end makes things complicated, right? So that was one step that we could do to simplify things, and it certainly made sense to me. No question, Tony, there are other Tolkien things we could talk about, right? He says, what about the letters? What about Mr. Bliss? Oh yeah, no, but we only have 3 more volumes, The History of Middle-earth, and then, goodness, wow, the world is our oyster at that point, and then we'll have to change things up, right? Yeah. So we'll see. I'll be really interested to see the election. I'm always keen to see the election, and often surprised at how it goes. There have been some real kind of come from behind moments here in the elections in the past, and Mallory was a surprise to me, and really fun, long but fun. Anyway, so I'm excited to see where we go next after this. Maybe a very short book this time, possibly, right? I mean, we've done some, right? Like, we only did one, we knew it was 5 weeks. Wasn't it 5 weeks, maybe 6 weeks on Boethius? When we did Boethius, that was very short. I think we did a book a week, 5 books of Consolation of Philosophy, and we did 1 book per week. Yeah, Dracula wasn't that long. Yeah, no, I mean, there have been a bunch. I mean, it used to be back in the old days, before we did Mallory, 12 sessions, was a long, pretty substantial class. So now, of course, having done, 36 was the final count for Mallory. Jonathan Strange was long, but that one, 14, maybe? We did 14 sessions, which again was like barely over a third of the Mallory class. So anyway, we'll see what happens. Looking forward to seeing your nominations. Looking forward to discussing whatever book it is that you guys want to talk about next together. So that'll be great. So the elections will start in probably in July. So next month we're going to have a little hiatus after this week. Next week, of course, is the night before Mythmoot, and I'm getting up at like 4 o'clock in the morning on the next day on Thursday, so we won't do class next week. Even I thought it was probably imprudent to teach class until midnight the day before I'm going to get up at 4 in the morning and drive for 8 hours, and then do a recreation of the flight to the Ford, right? So anyway, so no class next week, and then the week after that is the 4th of July week, and I'm going to be traveling with my family that week. So we'll have 2 full weeks off, and it won't be until like the 10th or 11th or whatever that is of July that we will come back together for class again. So anyway, so I just wanted to kind of mention the housekeeping stuff. We haven't done an election in a long time because Mallory's been so long, but we are doing one during this year, during this round. So that's good. And as I said, so be on the lookout for that. Ed is going to continue to collect votes by email, or he's going to announce it by email. He has a link that he sends people for an online form for voting. Be on the lookout for that in July. I'll tell you again when that is coming out. But just to keep you guys posted on how this is going to work. All right. That's good. Let's carry on here because we've got a lot to talk about here when we get to the Scouring of the Shire, and still a little bit leading up to that. So Frodo is really the story for tonight. Gandalf a little bit, but what Tolkien's first impulse with Frodo at the end of the Fellowship of the Ring, at the end of the Return of the King, is, I think, very interesting and very remarkable. I certainly agree with Christopher Tolkien's fascination in that particular change. And we'll get to there. First of all, let's remember, now, of course, the other extremely striking thing about the Scouring of the Shire is the absence of Saruman, right? That's another one of those things which, you know, if you'd asked me in advance, I would never have predicted that. Saruman's involvement in the Scouring of the Shire would be not quite an afterthought, but like a third draft thing, right? That almost the entire shape of the Scouring of the Shire would be present, but Saruman not there. Now, conceptually, he's there, right? Like we're still saying that it's basically Saruman's fault. It's still sort of an extension of Saruman's malice and Saruman's disease, but he himself being there. Even that the name Sharky is used, it's just attached to some other random dude, right? And not to Saruman himself. It is disconcerting. That is a very good word for it, Kate. I agree with that. So yeah, it's remarkable. But when we talked about this passage at the end of last time, but I just wanted to come back briefly to it because this is one of those passages. I mean, in retrospect, this helps to make sense of it, right? Given that his impulse, as we looked at last time, was to redeem Saruman, right? To have Saruman actually repent and even have this touching moment. Remember where Merry invites him to come live in the Shire. If you get tired of wandering in the wild, come to the Shire. This sort of really tender moment, right, between Saruman and Merry. It makes more sense, right? That we still have the troubles in the Shire which need to be put right, and those are still, we're still seeing the ripples of the evil that Saruman has done in that. And yet Saruman himself has been redeemed, right? Saruman himself has changed and reformed, and that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, Stephen, the Sharky thing, right? The etymology for Sharky that Tolkien gives in the footnote seems clearly in retrospect to be a later addition, right? But I agree, that's the part of it that makes it so surprising, right? Because we sort of think of that, right? Like we're like, okay, so Sharku, it means old man, right? So it comes to Sharky. It's like, no, he first makes up the name, then he applies the name to other people, then he applies the name to Saruman, then he makes up the etymology for it. And it's not the first time, right? That is, I mean, of course, the most famous example of this is Hobbit, right? He seems to make up, he makes up the word Hobbit. I know there are some people who are like, there are examples of Hobbit before, but I really don't think that, he was like, oh yes, I am referring to hobbits from whatever. I think he basically was making it up, even though it had been used before, perhaps. But anyway, he makes up the word Hobbit, and then eventually, like much, much, much later, when writing the appendices, finally makes up the etymology for it with the Holbitland thing, right? The hole builders. That's like way after the fact. So yeah, it's really interesting to see that go. And it's funny because, sometimes, and this is something I've observed in other contexts, right? Often I find that serious Tolkien fans can make the very amiable error of taking Tolkien almost too seriously, right? by which I mean, like, he'll say something and they'll remember it, right? And sort of like that. This is the most commonly made with what he says about allegory, right? When he's like, I've cordially disliked allegory. And so Tolkien fans will kind of latch onto that sentence where he says he cordially dislikes allegory, and, you know, and then like transmute that into a law. There is no allegory in Tolkien, which is of course not true. He doesn't use it much, and he doesn't like it much, and he's not very good at it, to be totally honest, because he doesn't think that way. He doesn't like it. But he does use it. Like, you can't kind of take it. Similarly, Tolkien fans will say, like, oh, it begins with the languages, right? It begins with the languages and the stories emerge from the language. So we see a linguistic point like that, Stephen, right? And we're like, oh, so clearly that's where it came from, right? So this is Tolkien we're talking about, right? So obviously, first he's got the word Sharku, and then he's like, he develops that into Sharky because it's Saruman, and so obviously that has to come first. And then of course it turns out, no, it came last, actually, right? You know, so just goes to show, right? It just goes to show. Yeah. Tony, I agree. Leaf by Niggle is a great example. He does a lot of allegory in Leaf by Niggle, and that's where he does it, by the way, most successfully. Leaf by Niggle is by far Tolkien's most successful allegory, whereas, like, I would say Tolkien's least successful allegory is Smith of Wootton Major. Not saying that story is unsuccessful. It's a wonderful story, but it's a terrible allegory. It was only after I read his own essay on it later on, when he says that it was meant to be an allegory, that I was like, what, really? For real it was? Okay, didn't get that at all, right? Totally missed that. And then he explains it, and I'm like, no, still not seeing it. Like, it just doesn't work that well. The allegory, by the way, in Smith of Wootton Major is that the cooks are supposed to be priests. So, like, the whole chef thing is supposed to be like the church. And the head cooks are like the parish priests. So it's supposed to be an allegory in that way. And I'm like, no, not feeling it. Like, it just doesn't, again, he doesn't really think that way, and doesn't do that. Yeah, James, I agree. When he does this sort of quasi-allegorical, I mean, they're not even exactly allegory. It's more, but anyway, James Oakley is thinking of the day, month, and year guys from the Book of Lost Tales. Yeah, exactly. This sort of enacted myth as enacted allegory, right? Yeah, it gets, when he tries that, it's pretty awkward, and he drops it pretty quickly. So yeah, no, exactly, Marianne. I again, I love Smith too. And again, I kind of like, I read that when he was talking about how he was kind of attempting that allegory, and then I'm just like, I think I'm just going to chuck that, actually, right? I mean, if I try to apply that, it doesn't really work, and it kind of messes everything up. So I'm like, just going to carry on as if I never read that, right? If you don't think of it as an allegory, the tale works super well. But anyway. Yeah. No, see, Takako, I do think it's true that I think sometimes if it's kind of done unconsciously, it can be better. There are people who are really good at it. C.S. Lewis is way better than Tolkien at allegory. He has that kind of a mind more. Not, and I don't want to get too distracted, not that the Chronicles of Narnia are an allegory, because they're not, but he does do allegory. And when he does allegory, he's much better at it, because he, unlike Tolkien, really enjoys allegory and read a lot of allegory for fun. But anyway, it's fine. Allegory, deliberate, carefully constructed allegory, is kind of a lost art. Pure allegory, like you want to read pure allegory, C.S. Lewis's Pilgrim's Regress. That is pure allegory. Pure allegory of an old kind, like Pilgrim's Progress, Bunyan, like many of the medieval allegories, like the Romance of the Rose and that kind of thing. Yeah. Anyway, Saruman. Goodness, how do we get there? No idea. But anyway, people taking Tolkien too seriously. Sharky didn't come first. Got it. All right. I'm back. Okay. Anyway, so let's go on and look at how it does emerge. And the thing that is interesting to me, like, of course, we will notice, right, that it's different, right? Okay, so, the story didn't come out in the same way. There are a couple things I want to observe about that as we're going to see that. But one of the primary things, just to kind of focus our analysis of it and our discussion of it. What I'm most interested in whenever I see this story going kind of in a different direction in the first draft is, what does this suggest to us about the concepts? Like, what is the story, right? What is the story he's trying to tell here? And then how do the fundamental principles of that story change, right, as he goes through and revises? And I think that Christopher Tolkien puts his finger on a bunch of that when in his own discussion of it. But I think there's some other things that we can see that Christopher doesn't get into. So, sorry, Stephen. I hope it didn't blow your mind saying that Pilgrim's Progress was allegory. Yeah, I know. It's hard to catch. It's pretty subtle, but Pilgrim's Progress has my favorite allegorical character ever, who's perfectly aware of his allegorical status when he comes in and he says, "My name is Honest, and I hope I am." I love that. Bunyan is fantastic. I love allegory, by the way. Yet another way in which I know, much as I love Tolkien, he and I do not think very much alike. But anyway, okay, moving on. Okay, just a couple last notes here from the Many Partings section. In the parting of Merry from Éomer and Éowyn, they address him as Meriadoc of the Shire and of the Mark. The name Holdwine of the Mark was only introduced in the Galley Proof. And Éomer says this of the gift of the horn, which he does not attribute to Éowyn. But you will take naught but the arms that were given you. This I suffer, because though we are of other lands and kind, still you are to me a dear kinsman, whose love can only be requited with love. But this one gift I beg you now to take. The horn is described in the same words as in The Return of the King, but then follows, "This is an heirloom of our house," said Éowyn, "and in the deeps of time it was made for our forefathers by the dwarves struck out of Dale, and Eorl the Young brought it from the north." The statement that the horn came from the hoard of Scatha the Worm entered on the Galley Proof. So here are two things. So the Galley Proof, we're talking about very late, right? Galley Proof is when, like, he's already gotten the galleys. So, meaning like the from the publisher, right? The sheets that show how it's going to be laid out on the page. And it's his last chance to go through and make changes. So, if he's making the changes on the Galley Proof, that is literally the last opportunity to make edits in the text before it goes to print. So in that last possible second, that's when we get the birth of Scatha the Worm and the Mary's name, Holdwine. That's another kind of small scale version, right? You read about Scatha the Worm and it's like, oh yeah, this came from a dragon horde. That's seriously cool. And it feels like, oh, that's a very Tolkien point, right? And very much not a part of the original story. Anyway, interesting to me that one of the things that I was interested in is that first impulse, right? He wants to make it an heirloom of their house. And so he has them bring it out of the north, in the deeps of time, but it only goes back to Dale, as I was joking in my subtitle there, presumably not the toy market of Dale, though that would seem to kind of bring things around full circle to the musical instruments that the Hobbit children are playing at Bilbo's party back in chapter 1, right? They're pulling crackers which were made in Dale, and they're pulling musical instruments manufactured for them. So the Horn of Merry from Rohan is also from Dale, right? Though in a more, epic tradition than the musical instruments, presumably, that they were playing, the Hobbit kids were playing at the party. But it's on the one hand, it's sort of an interesting point, right? It's a fun kind of reminder that, well, remember Legolas's comment when they're approaching Edoras and Aragorn is kind of telling them about the Rohirrim and you know, and Gandalf too, kind of briefing, especially Gimli and Legolas, right, about the Rohirrim, and Legolas is like 500 years, yeah, whatever, right? Like they've been living here for 500 years, which is barely anything, right? From Legolas's point of view, and even from Gimli's point of view, certainly culturally speaking, it's a very short time. So we get this brief glimpse into the fact that the deeps of time, from a Rohirric perspective, are relatively shallow, right? And it goes back to something which the dwarves would consider relatively recent history, right? And that's a fun kind of historical point, and something that, to me, it's a really neat kind of glimpse into one of the ways in which Tolkien is doing his world building, right? And thinking about the implications of this world that he has made, right, with these different races, with these fundamentally different perspectives. Because, of course, to any culture like that of Rohan, right, I mean, like to the Anglo-Saxons, 500 years before, I mean, that is the deeps of time, right? That is the immeasurably distant past. And it's kind of refreshing, because many people as readers really lose sight of that perspective, right? It is so easy to get into the habit of thinking about the things that happened 3,000 years ago in Middle-earth history as like, oh, like, surely everybody remembers everything about the War of the Last Alliance, right? Without thinking that was 3,000 years ago. Like, how many details do you know about what happened 3,000 years ago on planet Earth, anywhere on planet Earth, right? Maybe you know a couple things that you think probably happened 3,000 years ago, but we don't have that much detail, right? And so, but of course it's different with elves and even with dwarves, and that, but again, that kind of mixture I think is a really fun moment. However, I kind of like the second time, that, when he comes back to this and says, okay, no, I don't want to just sort of emphasize how the Rohirrim are kind of newbies on this. I really do want that horn to be epic, right? So instead he makes it come from a dragon horde, which is a pretty awesome pedigree, right? And also, in a sense, if you think about it, a similar kind of circling back to Bilbo at the beginning, right? Just as Bilbo comes back from his adventure with, treasure from the dragon's hoard, right? Merry comes back to the Shire as well at the end with treasure from the dragon hoard. So even that basic concept of kind of coming back full circle to the way that they return as like, well, I was going to say like as a second Bilbo, collectively as a second Bilbo, right? We can still see that, but on the high epic end rather than the sort of lower comedic end of that. James Oakley says, exploring the Lord of the Rings, session number 1 seems in the deeps of time. Yeah, it will be the deeps by the time we finish, the beginning of that class will be the deeps of time. Yes, Kate, I do believe, trying to remember the exact date of his death. I think Shakespeare was still alive 500 years ago. Yeah. That's a good framework, right, from the modern day. That was a long time ago, right? It's the deeps of time. And think of the advantages that we have, right, in how well we remember the last 500 years, comparatively. Exactly, Stephen. We can, just watch the History Channel. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, good. The other thing I wanted to point out about this, I loved that, that speech about still you are to me a dear kinsman whose love can only be requited with love. I just love that, the idea of, I like that being stated explicitly. I think it's still implicit in the published text. I don't think that that's like something that he's changed exactly, but at the same time, it's not explicit, right? So It's possible to read The Return of the King and their attitude, Éomer and Éowyn's attitude towards Merry, as, again, I'm not saying that I think this is the correct reading, but given how little is said explicitly, it is possible to read them as kind of doing this sort of honorary, like they're genuinely honoring Merry for his deeds, but like his giving him the title, Holdwina of the Mark, making him a knight of Rohan is kind of ceremonial, right? And I don't mean to imply that, I think in the published text they don't take him seriously, but as I said, if you wanted to do a reading that said Éomer and Éowyn, they honor Merry for what he did, but it's kind of honorary, right? They don't really sort of fully kind of accept him that way. It would be possible to maintain that reading. Again, I'm not saying I would agree with that reading, but you could make it. You could maintain that reading. You could support that reading, I think. But here, having him explicitly saying that, like, you are to me a dear kinsman, because though we are of other lands and kind, still you are to me a dear kinsman. Even that, you think of there's a certain amount of xenophobia in the Rohirric culture, right? They don't trust outsiders, especially outsiders who are super different from them. The Dunlendings are different enough, right? But think of their relationship with the elves, right? And they're not super quick to accept Gimli either. There's more than a little xenophobia in the whole cultural outlook of Rohan, and for them to not only overcome that, but to make this kind of personal declaration, you are to me a dear kinsman, whose love can only be requited with love. That's a wonderful statement. I really like that. Yeah, Tony, I agree. Even the Gondorians are kind of seen with a side eye. They're not the same, right? I mean, they look up to the Gondorians, but yeah. Anyhow, okay. Thinking about okay, so now they turned their faces for home, and though they rode now, they rode but slowly. But they were at peace, and in no haste, and if they missed their companions of their adventures, still they had Gandalf, and the journey went well enough once they passed beyond Weathertop. For at the fords of Bruinen, Frodo halted, and was loath to ride through, and from here on to Weathertop he was silent and ill at ease, but Gandalf said nothing. And when they came to the hill, he said, "Let us hasten," and would not look towards it. "My wound aches," he said, "and the memory of darkness is heavy on me. Are there not things, Gandalf, that cannot ever be wholly healed?" "Alas, it is so," said Gandalf. "I guess it is so with my wounds," said Frodo. The element here, which is really fascinating, and here I think that Christopher's insight into this is spot on and a really important one. What we see here, the difference between this first draft and the published text here, is Tolkien's shift from originally the final version in the final text. The relapse of Frodo's symptoms is going to coincide with the date, right? Every year, on the anniversary of his wounding at Weathertop, at the anniversary of his stinging by Shelob, right? He is going to re-experience some of those symptoms. Here, it's attached not to the time, but to geography, right? It's when he's crossing the Ford of Bruinen, when he is once again in the place where he was when he confronted the Witch King and collapsed, right? At the place, when he's passing by Weathertop and looking back at the place where he was stabbed. That's where it comes up. On the one hand, Nancy, I think that's exactly it. Nancy says the time is harder to avoid, right? In a lot of ways, this makes more intuitive sense to me, right? That is, So, it makes more sense to me that when he's in the place, he feels it again. The idea that for some reason, like, why is it that the turning of the year should have that effect exactly, right? No matter where he is, on October 6th, right? He's gonna feel his wound. That's, Carita says that this made her sadder than she would have expected. The experience of going to familiar places and feeling familiar suffering is more real, at least to me. Exactly, Carita. That feels more real to me too. But of course, Nancy, as you suggest, there's an easier remedy to that, right? Don't go, right? Don't go back. And clearly one of the things that Tolkien wanted was the continual relapse into his suffering as the years go by, even back in the Shire where everything's fine and nothing's wrong, right? It's still, he can't get away from it. Exactly, Stephen, exactly. How often is he going to be visiting the Fords, right? Well, like every time he goes to Rivendell, but again, he doesn't go ever again, in fact, right? So I can see how it is more functional in that way in order to tell the story that he wants to tell, which is how Frodo cannot be healed, right? How he is in recurring suffering, that does not stop as the years go by. That story, it works better to convey that story, to connect it with the time. But Carita, you really put your finger on that there. I think this feels more powerful to me in that way. And even, thinking about this scene as we thought about that for, we spent a long time at the Fords of Bruin in exploring the Lord of the Rings. One of the main things that really struck me as we were going through and discussing that and exploring the Lord of the Rings was the significance of the Fords of Bruin as a boundary, right? When they are talking about, that race to the ford, like there's this sense of, if he can just cross the ford, he'll be safe. And he is, in fact, right? Doesn't kind of looks touch and go for a second, but he is in fact safe after he gets across the boundary. And here he's going home, right? But he's crossing the boundary back again, right? It's not quite the same thing now. There's no Witch King there, but still, the way and the kind of impact that has, that sense of like, yes, I'm going home. Everything's fine, right? Every step brings me closer to peace and comfort and all of the loved and familiar things. And yet he's going back over that ground again. He's revisiting those places. He is still haunted by the suffering that he has had along the way. I think that really works. Yeah. But I mean, you're right. I don't deny the significance of, grief, especially, the connection between grief and time. And Kit, I absolutely hear that. Kit saying as a widow, there are anniversaries that are very bad days. Absolutely. And that seems to me especially true of grief. A little harder to attach, it seems to me, to this kind of thing, right? I mean, maybe, I don't know. I mean, I'd be interested to hear from anyone who has experienced this kind of trauma, like maybe somebody who is terribly wounded or something, combat trauma, that kind of thing. If the anniversary of that is hard, I know, Kit, I'm familiar with that. The connection between grief and anniversaries, those reminders of things that is, Patricia was just saying the same thing. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah, good. Yeah, Stephanie says she has secondhand experience with that. Yeah, and combat trauma definitely coincides with dates. Okay, yeah. Well, again, Tolkien would know about this, right? I mean, I'm sure and of course, in Tolkien's own life, the two are combined, right? You have the trauma of his experience in World War II, in World War I rather, which then coincides with his grief for his closest friends, right, who died there. So yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, and I agree, Devora. It is a really important point to remember that it's not just about memories, right? Not to say that just memories, as if that's unimportant or something, but yes, I agree. It is the physical pain of his physical wounds, right, which comes back to him at that on those dates, right? It's not only the psychological trauma of the grief and the memory. Yeah. No, Druid's Fire. I see that. Yeah. No, I do definitely respect that significance of dates there. But yeah, Devora, and I think that's the element with the dates that specifically I find hardest to kind of wrap my imagination around. Again, I can easily wrap my imagination around the anniversaries of traumas or the anniversaries of grief, right, that are associated with grief, different anniversaries associated with grief. But I have a harder time with why a physical relapse should be associated with the dates, especially since it's not psychosomatic, right? I mean, he's not even aware. Frodo doesn't even appear to be aware of the fact that it's like later on when it happens again, right? It's not a psychological trigger, right? Oh, this is the date. Yeah. And like, even when he doesn't have it, right? Even when he doesn't remember that it's that. Yeah. So yeah, and Marianne, I think that's fair. That perhaps these are relapses of the Fea even more than the Hurrah. Yes, I mean, I think it is fair to say, yeah, Stephen, as you're suggesting, because it's a spiritual wound causing physical pain. Yeah, so that it is something in his spirit, rather than merely physical symptoms, like purely bodily symptoms. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. Okay. Anyway, sorry. I don't want to get too distracted on this, but I thought that was, this passage really made me kind of think about that and how that worked in the Return of the King. And again, just how, it is, I find it so much more poignant, so much more psychologically powerful. This depiction of Frodo's, not just this one compared to the other ones. What I mean is, it would have been one thing to depict Frodo, and sometimes people talk this way. Sometimes people say, like, well, Tolkien would have been well aware, very familiar with people who come back physically broken from the war, right? People who come back and they're missing limbs, or they're carrying shrapnel for the rest of their lives, or they have inhaled gas and their whole respiratory system is shot now, and have all kinds of problems resulting from so they've returned home from the war, but nothing's the same, right? Because their body has been permanently damaged and they can't just fully recover from that. Yes, I mean, no question, that's true, but and I think that Tolkien kind of captures that, but what he does is more than that. Like, he does that, but it's like he takes the trauma, he takes grief, right? The grief trauma. He takes the PTSD trauma, right? He takes that kind of lingering physical, like the physical changes of circumstance as a result from these kinds of wounding or maiming. And he sort of combines them all into one really really complicated, but really spiritually and psychologically rich sort of state of Frodo at the end, right? And the way that he's able, even the very diversity of the kinds of experiences that so many of you are connecting to Frodo's experience here is in itself, I think, a remarkable testimony to what Tolkien captures here in Frodo's experience, in Frodo's condition there at the end. Yeah, he takes real life stuff and makes it mythic, Tarlonio. He really does. Yeah. Anyway, I was just really struck by that. I want to talk about that for a couple minutes here. Last point before we go on to the scouring of the Shire. Just a couple. This passage contained a few of the interesting name points. Fascinating to see how many of the names don't get fixed until the very, very last second. And out came Barnabas, wiping his hand on his apron and looking as bustled as ever, though there seemed few folk about, and not much talk in the common room. Indeed, he looked in the dim lamplight rather more wrinkled and careworn. "Well, well," he said, "I never expected to see any of you again, and that's a fact. Going off into the wild with that trotter." For real? Whatever response Butterbur made to Gandalf's request, "And if you have any tobacco, we'll bless you, ours has long since been finished," is not reported. When Butterbur objects that he didn't want a whole crowd of strangers settling here and camping there and tearing up the wild country, Gandalf tells him, "There's room enough for realms between Isin and Greyflood, and along the shores between Greyflood and Brandywine. And many folk used to dwell north away, 100 miles and more from you, on the North Downs, and by Nenuial, or even dimmer, if you have heard of it. I should not wonder if the Deadman's Dyke is filled with living men again. King's Norbury is its right name in your tongue. One day the king may come again." First of all, can I just say, I really wish that he had kept the name Even Dimmer. I love that. Christopher Tolkien says rather loftily in his commentary, "I have no explanation for the name Even Dimmer." I have an explanation for the name Even Dimmer. It's hilarious. Exactly, Nancy. You got Even Dim over here and you got Even Dimmer over there, right? It's a joke. It's a joke, right? I love that. That's hysterical. So like Even Dim is kind of a translation, but it's better if that translation is not kept in a pure form, but like turned into a colloquial joke by the locals, right? You call it Even Dimmer. I mean, come on, that's hysterical. It does sound a little bit Norse, Tony, mostly because just the ending of the ER ending makes anything sound Norse. But again, come on, Even Dimmer. That's really funny. You've got Deadman's Dyke and then Even Dimmer over there. Man, come on. But anyway, I thought that was awesome. 3 other names I would want to draw attention to. Of course, Barnabas. He's still Barnabas Butterbur. His name doesn't change to Barlaman until again later, like very, very last drafts here. So, and that's to me a fairly small point, right? I mean, I can't say that I can see a principled distinction. I mean, of course, it's one of those things, right? Like we all think of him as Barlaman Butterbur, so to see him being called Barnabas Butterbur just looks weird, right? But if we try to get over that fact, I don't myself see any real reason why Barlaman should be preferable to Barnabas exactly, or sort of like what in principle that change would seem to suggest about any sort of development in Tolkien's naming process there. Whereas Zachary, maybe that's it. Maybe it's Barnabas is too biblical, or just like too Greek, right? And so therefore that's why he changes it, because he doesn't want it. He doesn't want a Greek New Testament name to be there in the book. That would be my guess. Yeah, Stephen was just thinking the same thing. But anyway, I mean, I get that. It still seems to me rather a small change, unlike the change of Trotter to Strider, which has still not taken permanent residence, right? And I'm trying to remember now. This made me doubt myself. He did make that change, right, to Strider. I mean, Aragorn's Aragorn's name rather has undergone such a. I mean, he's come a long way since he was Gandalf's horse, right? But anyway, he did do the Trotter to Strider change, right? That did happen. Didn't that happen? I can't even remember now. He was Trotter for so long. I mean, he was Trotter way up into the Two Towers, and then of course he got his name Aragorn, and that was better. But whether he's still Trotter and not yet to Strider, or whether Tolkien is perhaps inadvertently reverting to Trotter here, fascinating that name is still lingering. But the word that I was especially interested in, the fateful change, tobacco, right? He's still using the word tobacco, and you'll notice he uses the word tobacco throughout the first and second draft of the Scouring of the Shire too, right? It is apparently only at the very last minute that he made the choice to say, I'm not going to use the word tobacco. I'm going to call it pipeweed instead, just because I don't want to use the word tobacco because it's a modern word. I want to use more pure Anglo-Saxon words, so I'm just going to make up a new word, conjunction of two simple old monosyllabic Anglo-Saxon words, pipe and weed, and so it'll be the weed that you put in pipes, and thus with that last second fateful decision, unbeknownst to himself, opened himself up for generations and generations of marijuana jokes, of which I must admit I have tired somewhat in the last decade of my life. So yeah, total confession, part of me wishes Tolkien had just stuck with tobacco there. Had he been calling it explicitly tobacco all the way through, lots and lots of not very funny marijuana jokes would have been prevented. But not something Tolkien really could have predicted, but just interesting. Again, another one of those things that's interesting, right? We know that Tolkien was very careful to only use words. You know, he didn't want to use words in the Lord of the Rings that had come into the language later than 1500. You know, that's kind of a famous factoid about the Lord of the Rings. But you can see, right, that that's not something that he was doing all the way through. Right. It's not something that was informing his writing from the beginning. That's a revision process thing, right? He's going to take a word like tobacco and change it, but only at the last, in the final stages of revision. All right. Scouring the Shire. Gandalf's non-departure is one of the first very striking things, right? Come along now, said the wizard. My name is Gandalf, and here is a brandy buck, a took, a baggins, and a gamgee. So if you don't open up quick, there will be more trouble than you bargained for, and long before sunrise. At that a window slammed, and a crowd of hobbits poured out of the house with lanterns, and they opened the far gate, and some came over the bridge. When they looked at the travellers, they seemed more frightened than ever. Come, come, said Merry, recognizing one of the hobbits. If you don't know me, Hob Hayward, you ought to. Okay, so Yeah, Stephen, I also think that the change that leaving Gandalf out of the beginning, at least, of the Skyrim, I mean, as we can see, it's a change that he made very quickly, right? He didn't plan to get rid of Gandalf, but when Gandalf comes in, Gandalf is acting in very Gandalfian ways, right? The scolding that he gives to the hobbits in the Shire house by the bridge is very Gandalfian, right? If you don't open up quick, there will be more trouble than you bargained for and long before sunrise, right? Sounds very like Gandalf, but it kind of takes away from the change in the hobbits, right, as they return, for Gandalf to be just like scolding everybody himself. Yeah, Stephen, that is a really cool point, isn't it? Right, how a brandy bucket, took, a Baggins, and a Gamgee are all given equal billing, right? That is kind of cool, right? It's got to be the first time in Shire history that somebody's been like, you've got a Gamgee to deal with, right? Along with, and his companions, a brandy bucket, took, and a Baggins. Yeah. Tony, I agree. This does sound more Gandalf the Grey than Gandalf the White, though, Gandalf the White certainly hasn't totally changed his personality, but yeah. Yeah, agreed. Yeah, Patricia's thinking it sounds even like sort of Gandalf from The Hobbit, which, yeah, totally. So that's one of the first striking things. And again, Tolkien seems to get uncomfortable with this fairly quickly. Like, let's not have this problem solved by Gandalf coming in and smacking the hobbits around and until they all sort things out, right? Yeah, I agree. This was this is one of my favorite recurring moments in reading the history of the Lord of the Rings are those moments when you read a line in an earlier draft that was kept into the later drafts, but whose context was changed by revision, but the line is the same. And now the line finally makes sense in a way that just doesn't make sense anymore in the final edition. For me, one of the biggest examples of this is the, but he had not the power of Bombadil, right? At the Fords of Bruinen. It's like, okay, right? But of course, when we read in the first edition in the first draft rather, how Bombadil, like there was a scene when the 9 riders are coming towards Tom Bombadil and he tells them to stop and they stop, right? So Frodo does the same thing to the same guys and they don't stop. So in that draft, it makes all kinds of sense. Still has meaning in the published text, but it's less clear, right? This was another example of that for me. I'm sorry, Mr. Merry, but we have orders. Whose orders? The mayor's, Mr. Merry, and the chief sheriff's. Who's the mayor? Said Frodo. Mr. Cosimo, changed to Sackville of Bag End, so he says, Mr. Sackville of Bag End. Oh, is he indeed? Said Frodo. And who's the chief sheriff? Mr. Baggins, changed to Sackville of Bag End, so both times he responds with Mr. Sackville of Bag End. Oh, indeed. Well, I'm glad he's dropped the Baggins at least. And he'll leave Bag End too if I hear any more nonsense. A hush fell on the hobbits beyond the gate. It won't do no good to talk that way, said Hob. He'll get to hear of it, and if you make so much noise, you'll wake up the big man. Okay, so 2 things on this slide that I was again. The first is that comment, right? I'm glad he's dropped the Baggins at any rate. That's the line, right? In the published text, Frodo says that after he's told, but we have to call him just the chief nowadays, right? And to which Frodo responds by saying, well, I'm glad he's dropped the Baggins at any rate, right? Which, like, okay, right, he's not calling him, being called chief is sort of dropping the Baggins, but it makes much more sense when he says that after hearing him called Mr. Sackville instead of Mr. Sackville Baggins, like he has literally dropped the Baggins out of his hyphenated name. So that in the first version, that line makes much more sense, and also transitions into Frodo's next thought. I'm glad he's dropped the Baggins at least, and he'll leave Bag End too if I hear any more nonsense. And that's really interesting, right? Because one thing that's easy to happen, one mistake. Well, no, I won't say mistake. And here I have to admit that I'm drawing on some of the discussion that Tolkien did in his letters. Right. There's one of his letters when he is talking. There are several letters where somebody asks him a question, and in response to his questions, to the questions given to him, he makes up a whole bunch of new stuff. Like he says things that are not in the books at all. Right. One, for instance, was he unfolded a great deal more about Hobbit birthday traditions, right? When somebody was asking him about the whole giving other people presents on your birthday thing. And in a special about the ring and the birthday present. The question was the very sensible question. If Gollum was of Hobbit kind originally, why is it that he thinks that he should get a present on his birthday rather than giving one? And Tolkien was kind of addressing that. Anyway, one of the other letters in which he does this kind of thing is he talks about the way that each of the major families have a head, right? Somebody who is sort of like the head of that household, the head of that family. And how Bilbo is the head of the Baggins family and Frodo is his heir, right? So there's more to it than just property possession, right? And so Bag End has become, through Bilbo's life, right, and of course his unusual, extraordinary, and successful life, and prolonged life, Bilbo has become the kind of figure, it's like the implication is, Bilbo has become the kind of figure that Bag End is now almost like the seat of the Baggins, right? The one who is the head of the Baggins household. I think we can see hints of that kind of thinking here. He'll leave Bag End too. One might say, well, that's a little harsh. Didn't he buy it fair and square, right? Isn't it kind of his property? Why is Frodo saying he's going to repossess, Bag End? What he seems to be implying there, right? He's dropped the Baggins at least, and he'll leave Bag End too if I hear any more nonsense, right? He does not deserve to live in Bag End. I'm glad he is excluding himself from the family because I'm back and I'm going to kick him out of the family and I'm going to boot him the heck out of Bag End because he does, after what he's done, he doesn't deserve it anymore. Nancy says that's definitely not how real estate works, right? But again, see, clearly more than just a real estate transaction, just as there seems to be more to the will, right? Bilbo's will. This is why Otho and Lobelia come demanding to see the will, not only because they want the house, or at least again, this seems to be a further development of the why they want to see the will and everything, because Lobelia has justification for thinking herself the logical head of the Baggins household rather than this. And again, think of her comment to Frodo, "You're no Baggins, you're a Brandybuck," right? He's this interloper, right? He's barely he styles himself as the Baggins, right? The Mr. Baggins of Bag End. Remember that passage, right? Yeah, like, you're the head of this family now? I don't think so. You little Brandybuck, right? You little half-breed Baggins, you're not even fully Baggins, right? So again, you can kind of that concept that Tolkien lays out in that letter, kind of, when you push it back through a bunch of the things that are said here, makes a lot of sense. And again, I think it's coming through pretty clearly right there, and he'll leave Bag End too if I hear any more nonsense. But also just flat interesting that Cosimo has in fact dropped the Baggins out of his name, right? Kind of interesting. Okay. Here's this. This is Gandalf's final hurrah in the Scouring of the Shire. "I'll wake him up in a way that'll surprise him," said Gandalf. This is, of course, the big man. "If you mean that your precious mare is employing ruffians out of the wild, then we've not come back too soon." He leaped from his horse and put his hand to the gate and tore the notice from it and threw it onto the path in the faces of the hobbits. This was the last appearance of Gandalf before the final leave-taking at the Grey Havens. Gandalf was changed here to Frodo and horse to pony, and it was presumably at this point that the note given on page 77, Gandalf should stay at Bree, was written on the manuscript. It will be seen in what follows that in this original version of the story, Frodo played a far more aggressive and masterful part in the events than he does in The Return of the King, even to the slaying of more than one of the ruffians at Bywater and their leader at Bag End, despite his words to Sam already present in the first manuscript of The Land of Shadow, "I do not think it is my part to strike any blows again." So, yeah. Anyway, it feels like this passage, this seems to be the tipping point. Like, it's at this moment, and it's hard, I don't want to try to get into Tolkien's head and say, what was he thinking when he made this choice? But this passage is fairly striking, right? The ripping down of the notice and the throwing it on the path in the faces of the hobbits by Gandalf, right? By a bristling, angry Gandalf, threatening to surprise the big man. He himself is a big man, right? Apart from the whole wizard angle, just even physically, he's towering over these hobbits, right? And he's in this rage and he's ripping things off and he's throwing things around. It begins to sound almost abusive, right? Like, here's Gandalf coming back and he's ready to smack these little hobbits into line, right? It's just like the dynamics are not right? That's not how it works. And, I think that's a really good change. Exactly, Bruce. And that's even before you take the eyebrows into account, right? At that point, it becomes, the power imbalance is just really too much to handle. Exactly. It does look almost like bullying, Tony. And in particular, you think of the dynamic in the sense that, like, okay, so they've been bullied. The Hobbit, they're coming back and they're finding that these men, these ruffians have been bullying the Hobbits. So what's the solution? Have another big man come in and bully them back into shape, right? It's just, no, that really doesn't work. So the more that again, the comments that he gives to Gandalf are very true. To you can hear, can't you hear Gandalf saying those things? If you mean that your precious mare is employing ruffians out of the wild, then we've not come back too soon, right? I mean, that sounds like Gandalf. You can totally hear that in Gandalf's voice. So it's not that I think he's making Gandalf act out of character. It's just when he does act out of character, then he finds that it doesn't work, right? It's not suitable. And indeed, the parallel, Stephen, that you're suggesting, right? He's like, well, the White Wizard does have a history of oppressing hobbits, right? Exactly. I mean, the kind of awkward parallelism. I mean, on the one hand, you could say it works, right? Oh, what Saruman did led to this in the show. So Gandalf's going to come in and clean house, right? And make it right. It's not that there's not a symmetry to that. Obviously, sure there is, but it's a very different kind of story, right? And it makes it, that parallelism all by itself would make it feel much more kind of unilateral on Gandalf's part. And I think it's obviously a much better story when he makes that choice here. One other brief note. I've spoken before. It's been a while since we've talked about this, but I've spoken before about Tolkien's habit of like how conservative Tolkien is as a reviser, like how reluctant he is to throw anything away. This is so typical of his revision. So he gets to, Gandalf has had several bullying speeches, right, where he's throwing his wizardly weight around and browbeating the hobbits. So Tolkien decides, no, he's not there, right? He stayed at Bree. So Gandalf's not there. So clearly you've got to rewrite those scenes, right? Wrong. You don't have to rewrite those scenes. All you got to do is take those Gandalfian speeches, which sound a lot like Gandalf, and give them practically word for word to Merry and Pippin, right? No problem, right? Or Sam, right? There are different characters that he gives to him. Merry is the recipient of many speeches, though, of course, in the interim, it's Frodo, right? Frodo takes over Gandalf's harsh speeches at first, which sounds weird also, but that's a different issue, right? That's the Frodo issue, which we'll get to as we continue moving forward here. But just, it's kind of amazing, right? It's to me, one of the most unsettling or Kate, to use your word from earlier, one of the most disconcerting experiences in reading these earlier drafts is when you come across lines that you know word for word, except somebody else is saying them, right? And even lines that that sound in the final draft, like they might be lines that you would point to and be like, oh, like that is Pippin all over, right? Like that is such a perfect Pippin line. And then you go back to the original draft and find, actually, that line was originally somebody else entirely, right? And he transferred it over to Pippin. That doesn't, I think, invalidate the observation that we make in the published text, right? It does perfectly fit him. And what he does, what Tolkien is able to accomplish with some of these kind of minimalistic revisions is entirely remarkable. It's incredible to me, the way he can radically convert a scene in a way that's, I mean, I've seen this happen a lot. I mean, as a composition teacher, this was one of my pet peeves. When I'd assign a revision, I'd say, you need to fix this. And they change like one word here and there and think that it's fixed. And I'm like, that's not fixed, right? You need to really come at this again, right? I used to have that conversation a lot with my undergrads. But here we see Tolkien not doing that. And yet it is transformed, right? And that's amazing. It's amazing to me. Okay, let's move forward with Frodo first a Sam moment. And I cherish every line of Sam Gamgee that got cut out, just because I love Sam's line so much that I love it. I mean, how awesome was it when Sam throws Ted Sandyman into the river, right? Good. I can tell you what you're going to do next. Take a bath. Whoosh. I mean, come on. That was fantastic. I loved that. There's still a memory of it in his line about how he has no time for bathing. But come on. Oh man, the dunking of Ted Sandyman was classic. Yeah. No, Kate, I think, and Matthew, I agree. Sandyman getting thrown in the river might be the best thing that shouldn't have been cut from this chapter. Yeah, maybe. At the end of the day, where he came to is fine. But yeah, I do. There's definitely a strong part of me that regrets the chucking of Ted Sandyman into the river. Kate, that's a really good way of saying it, and thinking of passages like that. Tolkien knows that the words are right, but he hasn't yet found out where they belong, right? Really, those were like Pippin's speeches all along. They just weren't initially correctly attributed to him. Anyway, so, but getting onto the actual passage I'm quoting here. If I hear not aloud much oftener, said Sam, I'm going to get angry. Can't say I'd be sorry to see it, said Robin, and he dropped his voice. Tell you the truth, your coming back and Mr. Frodo and all is the best that's happened in a year. The mayor's in a fine taking. He'll be in a fine getting before many days are over, said Sam. That's so good. To take that phrase in a fine taking, right? Which is a figure of speech, legitimate figure of speech, and for him to reverse it out, he'll be in a fine getting before many days are over. I mean, that kind of witticism, right? Like, I'm going to take and I'm going to do wordplay by cunningly reversing. I mean, this is very like Oscar Wilde kind of wordplay, right? Which is a little unlike Sam, but kind of cool. I like it, right? I like it. Yeah. Tony says, we don't know that Ted doesn't get thrown in the river. It's just untold. Perhaps that's still, So Tony, if you still want to imagine Sam throwing Ted in the river in your head canon, I think you can get away with that. Yeah, Steve and I agree. You can hear the difference right here, right? When Gandalf says things like this, it seems like bullying. With Sam, it's absolutely delightful. Yes, the kind of the bluntness and the perfect coolness with which they are speaking truth to power here, right? Is absolutely delightful. Yeah. Anyway, okay. Our first confrontation with Sharky, that is, Sharky, take one. Yes, I see, said Frodo. I'm beginning to see a great deal, but I fear you're behind the times and the news here, ruffian Sharky. Your day's over. You come from Isengard, I think. Remember, this is the confrontation that they have when they first get to Bywater, before they've gone on to Bag End or before they go to Farmer Cotton's. Your day's over. You come from Isengard, I think. Well, I have myself come from the south, and this news may concern you. The Dark Tower has fallen. There is a king in Gondor. Isengard is no more, and Saruman is a beggar in the wilderness. You are the fingers of a hand that has been cut off, and arm and body too are dead. The king's messengers will be coming soon up the greenway, not bullies of Isengard. The man stared at him, taken aback for a moment. Then he sneered. Swagger it, little cock-a-whoop on your pony, he said. Big words and fat lies won't scare us. King's messengers, he said. When I see them, I'll take notice, maybe. This was too much for Pippin, as he thought of the minstrel upon Cormallen and the praise of all the fair host, and hear this squint-eyed rascal calling the ring-bearer little cock-a-whoop. He flashed out his sword and rode forward, casting aside his cloak, so that the silver and sable of Gondor which he still wore could be seen. We are the king's messengers, he said, and I'm the squire of Frodo of the Nine Fingers, knight of Gondor, and down you go in the road on your knees, or we'll deal with you. Changed to, and I am the esquire of the Lord of Minas Tirith, and here is Frodo of the Nine Fingers, renowned among all peoples of the West. You are a fool. Down on your knees in the road, or I'll set this troll's bane in you. His sword glinted red in the last rays of the sun. Merry and Sam drew and rode up beside him, but Frodo made no move. Sharky Primus. Yeah, Sharky the First, as both Matthew and Deborah suggested. Yeah. Karina says you are the fingers of an arm of a hand that has been cut off is first of all gross and second very cool. Yeah, well, Stephen, there is memories of the Barrow, right? It's also a kind of an awkward. Mr. Frodo of the Nine Fingers is like your fingers of a hand that's been cut off, kind of like my finger, except totally different. And maybe there's a little bit too much dismemberment going around in this whole passage, perhaps. But anyway, I do like the metaphor about the hand and body. I mean, and the way it keeps piling on, right? It would be enough to say you are the fingers of a hand that has been cut off. Right. I mean, because that not only says I recognize that you are emissary, you are the servants of Saruman, of Isengard, right? He's only a hand. He's not even the head, right? He's just a hand of Mordor, and that hand has been cut off, right? But then, of course, piling onto that, and arm and body too are dead, right? Yeah, no. The whole corpse is rotting and stinking now. Yeah. Yeah, so that's an interesting question. The immediate change that Tolkien makes there, how Pippin first introduces himself as Frodo's squire, and then changes it to Esquire of the Lord of Minas Tirith, and just introducing Frodo rather than announcing himself to be the servant, essentially, of Frodo of the Nine Fingers. Or squire, not exactly the same as servant, but still. To me, the primary thing, right? The number one impulse here, right, which is very visible in that passage, is the elevation of Frodo, right? I mean, we've seen Christopher referring to that. We've already seen some examples of it, like how all of Gandalf's harsh and dramatic actions are transferred to Frodo initially. How he's really taking the lead and he's the one bossing the sheriffs around and everything else. So, yeah, Kate. No, yes. Pippin's already been identified. I mean, we already have him swearing the oath, right? Which there's no evidence that that Aragorn rescinds, right? In fact, Pippin serving. Remember how Tolkien kind of was uncertain about how the reunion with Merry and Pippin at the Field of Cormallen was going to happen, right? But the one thing that was common in every instance of it was he, including in the published text, right, is that he is going to have Frodo and Sam meet Merry and Pippin in their positions as servants to the kings, right, as esquires. But anyhow, so that's been settled. The question, again, the thing that the two introductions by Pippin have in common is that both of them greatly elevate Frodo, and that is clearly the central point of them, right? The change seems to be Pippin's presentation of himself, right? The first one, so Tolkien's first impulse is to have Pippin himself take a very humble role, like, I am merely the squire of Frodo, like, do you know who this person is, right? I'm not important, but he is super important, right? That's the first impulse. Then he's like, yeah, no, okay. Pippin isn't going to downplay what is true, right? That he is in fact kind of a big deal. He's a Knight of Gondor, right? But anyway, yes. And yeah, you can't be, as Tony says, you can't exactly be a knight and a squire at the same time. It's a little bit strange. Yeah. But anyway, so he's still going to elevate Frodo, but he first begins by being like, first of all, let me explain who I am, right? Having established that, now let me make sure that you know this is Frodo of the Nine Fingers that we're talking about here. Yeah. Kate, it does recall Gandalf adding a second toast to Frodo and Sam at the feast after the burial. Once again, just as we can sort of see the foundations of that kind of strange and unusual change, right? That is the change of not having Saruman be there in the Shire at the center of things, not having him be Sharky. And that feels weird, right? But we can see the roots of it, right? The seeds planted for that, or I guess that's a weird metaphor. It's like we can see the inhibition, right, that kept that from happening. So too, I think, Kate, we can see the seeds here. That metaphor works better. The seeds of this depiction of Frodo, the role that Frodo takes in the Scouring of the Shire, this impulse to emphasize the glory of Frodo and the value of Frodo and how much he has grown and become a mighty lord himself, right? That second toast from Gandalf in Edoras is a great illustration of how we see that impulse, Tolkien wanting to strongly emphasize that. And so Frodo being masterly when he returns to the Shire fits with that. Yeah. I know, Karita, isn't this awesome? I mean, and I love there's details here we don't get in the published text, right? Do we get at least I don't remember them. His sword glinted red in the last rays of the sun. Do we get that in the published text? I don't remember that sentence. Maybe I'm just forgetting it. But anyway, I think it's pretty awesome. But yeah, Frodo, to me, the number one story, I mean, again, Christopher emphasizes it too, the number one story in the Scouring, in this first version of the Scouring of the Shire, is that Tolkien's initial impulse is to elevate Frodo in this way. He still elevates Frodo in the published text, but differently, right? Very differently. We'll get to more of this. The fall of Cosimo. What do you mean, Frodo? Said Pippin. Poor Cosimo? I'd seal his doom if I could get at him. I don't think you understand it all quite, said Frodo, though you should. You've been to Isengard. But you've been in Isengard, sorry. But I've had Gandalf to talk to, and we've talked much on the long miles. Poor Cosimo. Well, yes, he's both wicked and silly, but he's caught in his own net. Can't you see? He started trading with Saruman and got rich secretly and bought up this and that on the quiet, and then he's hired these ruffians. Saruman sent them to help him and show him how to build and maybe repair and all other things. And now, of course, they're running things in his name, and not in his name for long. He's a prisoner, really, in Bag End, I expect. Well, I am staggered, said Pippin. Of all the ends to our journey, this is the last I expected. To fight half-orcs in the Shire itself? To rescue Cosimo the Pimple of all people? By the way, the Pimple nickname is so much better with the definite article in the middle, right? Lotho Pimple is funny, right? Lotho the Pimple is much funnier, right? Because Lotho Pimple could just be a kind of mean-spirited nickname for somebody with a lot of acne, right? I mean, I always assumed, I certainly always pictured Lotho as being, Cosimo changed to Lotho as being, having lots and lots of zits, but it's a totally different thing to call him Cosimo the Pimple, right? It's not that he has pimples. It's that he is a pimple, right? Pimple is the best metaphor for Cosimo. And honestly, it totally is, right? Like you are a pustule, right? You're a big man, right? You have grown and your lands have expanded, but you've not in fact grown in stature like Frodo has. You have merely swelled like a pimple and need to be popped so the pus can come out and the wound can heal, right? It's a wonderful, disgusting metaphor for Cosimo / Lotho's role, right? It's fantastic. But yeah, so why he left out the why he becomes Lotho Pimple, I don't know. But anyway, there we go. Yeah. Devorah says just blame the printers. Yeah, maybe. Maybe he really meant it to be Lotho the Pimple. Yeah, blame the printers because they can't defend themselves. Yep, exactly. I choose to believe that, all of the changes not explicitly mentioned in these texts, which I don't like, are not Tolkien's fault. One other thing that I think we can see illustrated, another kind of reminder as we're reading through here, two things. First, remember, as Christopher has reminded us and as we've discussed at many points, just because Tolkien takes something out doesn't mean that it isn't there. Like the right? The is there in principle, even though it's not stated. But in addition to that, there are many of the specific details here that are not spelled out in the final text. Because, and again, this is my second point, remember last time when we were looking at the many parting stuff, I was talking about how unusual, right, how remarkable it is in many partings, how remarkable it seems to me that he does an outline and then kind of fills in details of that outline and then keeps expanding as he goes along until he's fleshed it out to the full form. That may seem a totally logical way to write, and I would probably write more like that, but myself, but it's unusual for Tolkien. This is how Tolkien's drafting was more commonly went, right? This kind of really fast, really bad writing, as these ideas are tumbling out and he's getting the whole narrative. And usually he writes down more than he keeps in in the end, right? The process of revision is less one of fleshing out an outline and more of, I said too much, I made it too explicit, I'm gonna cut back on some of those details. Again, not necessarily because he's changed his mind about them, but because he doesn't want to say it all. He doesn't want to do all of this exposition. So Frodo makes a speech almost exactly like this in the published text. It's just shorter, right? He gives fewer details. But I don't doubt, in this case, everything that Frodo says in this paragraph is undoubtedly true. It's just that he doesn't do quite as much detailed exposition. Exactly. He's pruning. Exactly, Stephen. He does tend to over-explain, right? Because he's sort of seeing this stuff and working it out on the fly, right? In prose as he goes through, and then he trims it back. That's the normal procedure. The more representative, I would say, procedure, right, of Tolkien's drafting. But as a result, and it's one of the things that makes the draft so much fun, is because as a result, we get to learn stuff that we don't know from the text, and which I think is probably still relevant, right? So it's awesome. Now we can think of him as Lotho the Pimple. Pimple as metaphor, not as mean nickname. Love it. Okay. Here's another wonderful example of something that gets cut or trimmed down very significantly. But again, I don't think any of it's really gone. The arrival at the Cottons. The bolts were drawn back stealthily, and it crossed Sam's mind that he had never known that door to be locked, let alone bolted before. Farmer Cotton put a head round and looked at them in the gloaming. His eyes grew round as he looked at them, and then grave. "Well," he said, "voices sound all right, but I wouldn't have knowed you. Come in." There was dim light in the passage, and he scanned their faces closely. "Right enough," he said, and laughed with relief. "Mr. Baggins and Sam and Mr. Merry and Mr. Pippin. Well, you're welcome, more than welcome, but it's a sorry homecoming. You've been away too long." "What's come of my gaffer?" said Sam anxiously. "Not too well, but not too bad," said Farmer Cotton. "He's in one of they new shire houses, but he comes to my back door, and I sees he's better fed than some of the poor things. He's not too bad." Sam drew a breath of relief. "Shire houses," he said. "I'll burn the lot down yet." "Nice, Sam. Don't hold back." They went into the kitchen and sat down by the fire, which the farmer blew up to a blaze. "We go to bed early these days," he said. "Lights o' night bring unwelcome questions, and these ruffians, they lurk about at night and lie abed late. Early morning's our best time." Yeah, Stephen, he doesn't threaten to gnaw the houses down if he has to. I agree. So, again, lots of detail here. One of the things that's so striking to me, notice how we can really see Tolkien imagining here what was the daily life of the oppressed hobbits like, right? We get little glimpses of it that linger into the published text, but we never get a picture this clear. Even think of the stealthiness with which he draws the bolts back, right? The hesitancy with which he invites them in, the relief he feels when he sees that it's really them and it's not a trick, right? His quotation of what sounds like it has become a new figure of speech, right? Lights o' night bring unwelcome questions, right? This glimpse of early morning's our best time, right? How like in the early morning hours when all of the ruffians are lounging in bed, that's the only time when, the idea of imagining these early morning hours on the farm, right? Those are the times when now the gaffer can sneak up and come to his back door, and he can, so he routinely is handing out food and things to poor bodies who come to his back door, who only come to the back door at dawn, right? Or after dawn. It's a really charming, much more clear, much more visceral picture of life in this dystopia, right, that the Shire has kind of devolved into. To me, it hits much more strongly, right? I doubt this has changed. I'm sure that all of the conceptions that underlie this passage are probably, I don't see any reason to think they're not still in Tolkien's mind. He just doesn't spell it out this much. Good. Christopher and James Oakley both are noticing how much more rustic Farmer Cotton's dialect is. He does speak with a more rustic dialect. His speech is more like Sam's and the Gaffer's speech patterns, but less so. I agree. Tolkien does exaggerate it here. Anyway, and notice how much less of stature Farmer Cotton is, right? And again, that seems to fit, right? We want Frodo needs to stand head and shoulders above all the other hobbits, right? When he comes back to the Shire. James, I agree. It's more comedic in the published text. The comment about Sam's face, right? Your face is no worse than it was. He says to Sam, right? Very different from come inside and then I'll confirm that it's really you, right? There's almost like a give the countersign, right? It's weird. Boomful, did my volume just jump heavily? There is something whacked in my audio system and I have no idea what it is. That's happened on a couple broadcasts where for 20 seconds, all of a sudden the mic gets blasted really loud and then it goes back down again, and I'm not changing anything. Nothing's changing. I don't have any idea why that happens. Super weird. Anyway. Oh, it's interesting, but that didn't happen, James, in GoToWebinar, only in Twitch. Very interesting. Oh, Tim says only on my right speaker. Very interesting. Yeah, Nargle's clearly Nargle's messing with my audio. Fascinating. Okay, that's an interesting. I received some interesting data trying to problem solve, trying to troubleshoot this problem here. So that's good. Okay. More. Oh man, the Battle of Cotton Farm, right? So the ruffians come to them in the house, right? Notice also the potential parallels here. When they're surrounded and the ruffians are talking about burning the place down around them, right? Notice how this almost begins to sound like all of a sudden we might be in a Norse epic, right? And everyone's going to die. Defending a surrounded house while your enemy burns it down around you would be a very Norse ending to this story, right? That's kind of interesting. But anyway, okay. All the better, said Frodo. Now for it. So the whole gang has come and Frodo's excited that they're all there. The four hobbits stood back to the wall towards which the door swung. The farmer unbolted the bolts, turned the key, and then slipped back to the stairs. The door swung open, and in peered the head and shoulders of Sharky. They let him come in, and then quickly Frodo drove the point of his sword into his neck. Wow! He fell, and there was a howl of rage outside. Burn them! Burn them! Voices cried. Go and get fuel! Nar! Dig them out, said two, and thrust into the passage. They had swords in their hands, but Frodo, now behind the door, swung it suddenly in the face of the rear one, while something Sam ran sting through the other. Then the hobbits leaped out. The ruffian who had been down on his face was leaning against the doorpost. He fled, blood pouring from his nose. The farmer took the sword from the fallen ruffian and stood guard at the door. The hobbits ranged about the yard stealthily. They came on two ruffians bringing wood in from the woodpile and somethinged and killed them. I don't even know what happened first, before they were attacked. It is like a rat hunt, said Sam, but that's only four and one with a broken nose. Sam's appetite for blood is unslaked. At that moment they heard Merry shouting, Gondor, to the mark! And they ran and found him in a corner of the stackyard, with four ruffians pressing on him, but held at bay by his sword. They had only knives and clubs. Frodo and Sam came running from one side and Pippin from another. The ruffians fled, blowing horns, but one more fell to Frodo's sword before he could escape. Whew! All right. Kate Neville says, this sounds like the version that Peter Jackson might have filmed. Yeah, no, I think he would have been into this. This is, Christopher, isn't this amazingly brutal? I'm trying to, are there any other descriptions, like at all, of battles that are as gruesome as this? I mean, we get, we get some dismemberments, you know, we get some, but this is, yeah, yeah, Ben, exactly. It's Frodo and the Nibelungs and the not yet burning farm. No, definitely sounds like that. And oh my goodness, Marianne, exactly. How many miles are we away from the Frodo who will not, who will not draw his sword, right, in the published text? It's like we're getting further and further from that all the time. Yeah, not even in Moria. No, that's the one I was thinking of, Christopher, in particular, the battle in Moria. Yeah. Marilyn says Tolkien is extremely pissed off by the ruination of the Shire. Yeah, well, Sam is, right? It's like a rat hunt? Really? I mean, yeah, okay. That's evocative, right? And an interesting reversal, right? Far from being the bullied ones, right? They're not the big bullies. They're just like rats that we have to hunt down. And of course, hunting rats is something which, like, Sam would have done, right? As a gardener, like, you gotta, like, the rats would have been pests that, he would have exterminated in times past. So, it's a metaphor within his, or a simile, technically, within his idiom, right? Anyway, this is an altogether remarkable passage. Even the tactics, right? I mean, the detailed tactics which Tolkien describes here, like them standing against this door and slamming the door here, and then coming around and approaching those four ruffians from either side. And I mean, it's much more detail than we get in almost any battle, right? It's yeah, good, Bruce. That is interesting. It kind of recalls the detailed tactics we got in the early version of Helm's Deep. Yes, that is true. Perhaps we can see a change there, right? Perhaps we can see there an alteration in this trend toward. So, I've often said, and just looking at the published text, Tolkien doesn't show much interest in the details of battlefield tactics. I mean, there are very, very few examples of Tolkien giving descriptions of detailed tactics in the published text. I mean, the whole pincher movement between Fingon and Maedhros in the Nirnaeth Arnoediad, which of course goes horribly wrong, is one of the closest that we get to real. We get a little bit of it at the beginning of the Battle of Five Armies, but anyway, there's just not much. And I always took that for sort of lack of interest on Tolkien's part. But I agree with you, Bruce. The evidence does seem to suggest that he does think that way, but then deliberately cut it out of most of the stories, right? It's one of the things that he trims back on when he revises. And yes, James, the biggest single exception, of course, was one never published in his lifetime, which is his description of the Battle of the Fords of Isin, which is extraordinarily detailed in its depiction of the battle tactics of the Rohirrim as they're trying to defend the Fords of Isin. And of course, Tomas, you're right. We always have the Fall of Gondolin too. There also we can see a lot of interest in that kind of thing. So yeah, no, I agree. I don't know why. Dvorak, is it because he thought his audience wouldn't be interested? Is it because he wanted to emphasize different things? He didn't want the emphasis to lie there. He wanted it to lie elsewhere. But anyway, yeah, he doesn't seem to stick with this kind of thing. Of course, he's not going to stick with this entire scene, but yeah. Christopher, you're right. The disaster of the Gladden Fields, we get the Númenórean battle tactics, right? We see how they would have kicked it Númenórean style on the battlefield, right? And that seems to be one of his interests there. Yep. No, in those texts, he's very, very detailed. So yeah, no, I think the evidence seems to suggest it's not lack of interest on his part in that. But he does seem fairly systematic in his choice not to include that stuff in the final published text. Stephen, I do suspect, you're right. I suspect that the Cottons do in fact throw their dishes out of the upstairs windows. They do seem to have an upstairs, right? And I assume, therefore, that like all good hobbits should, they throw their dirty dishes out of the upstairs windows. So clearly, I think that's it's not explicit, but I think it's plainly implicit in the text there. Good. The last thing, and again, this is a really obvious point, but it bears stating explicitly. It's one thing to say Tolkien wanted to raise Frodo's status, right? He wanted to show Frodo returning to the Shire and returning to the Shire in heroic stature. It's one thing to say that. It's entirely another thing to say, yeah, and that heroic stature should look like this, right? That he makes Frodo into an action hero in the Scouring of the Shire, right? Down to the solo combat, like to the boss fight at the end, right? Frodo being like, no, I will take him single-handed, right? I mean, that's very, very remarkable. Very remarkable that Tolkien makes that call, right? That he makes that choice to say, again, it is one thing and a very interesting thing that he wants to emphasize Frodo. Do you know who this is? This is Frodo of the Nine Fingers. It's a completely different thing to say that this is the kind of glory, the kind of stature that he should have. Bruce says that maybe Frodo will be played by The Rock in the reboot movie. Yeah, exactly. So you think in the Amazon Lord of the Rings, they're gonna put The Rock. They're gonna cast The Rock into Frodo's role. I mean, again, there are moments when that almost sounds appropriate, right? Good, Stephen. Yeah, that's well recalled. We see the impulse in both The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings to have his hero be a legendary warrior. For those of you who haven't read the history of The Hobbit, the first impulse, the very first time he describes the death scene of Smaug, it's Bilbo who single-handedly stabs Smaug and kills him. And not only that, he gets drenched in the blood of the dragon and is made invulnerable, is hardened, like Sigurd is hardened by the blood of Fafnir. So yeah, like Bilbo almost came back to the Shire very changed indeed from his adventure. So yeah, I mean, that's, that impulse is brief in the manuscript history of The Hobbit, but it's there, Stephen, just as you say, right? And so the idea that he's kind of, I almost said relapsing into that model here with Frodo is totally fascinating to me. Bruce says, reminds us we do get him compared to Turin and Beren. Fair enough. Yeah. And Tony, I agree. When he gets to the final version, it's much more like his own war experience, where soldiers come home after heroic deeds and nobody knows or cares. Yeah. Well, let's continue to... Go on. Holy cow. This passage just cracked me up. I laughed so hard. So this is in the notes. There are a couple of pages of roughly penciled text which repeat with minor alterations and extensions this section of the chapter in A, made perhaps because my father recognized the near illegibility of the original, and these pages have provided help in elucidating it here and there. Characteristically, Christopher adds, the words or phrases that defy elucidation in the original text are expressed differently in the second, as if Tolkien himself couldn't read them, right? But here's my favorite point. At this point, the penciled text has, remember there's a reference in the draft to how the Tooks had, that more than one of the ruffians had been brought into the great house of the Tooks, and beaten, right? And thrashed. And I was like, well, they dragged him inside and then beat him up. Like, that's kind of hardcore. Like, okay. And they've caught a ruffian or two and thrashed him in the Tookus. Come on. Thrashed him in the Tookus. Right? Oh, man. Oh. And then Christopher Tolkien explains, without elaborating on the joke, right? Explains the verbal humor, right? Tookus being tookhouse as workhouse becomes workus. Thrashed him in the Tookus. Oh, come on. Oh, that is hilarious. And kind of unanticipated, right? Like that kind of humor. Even that kind of wordplay, like Tolkien, for all of his fascination with words and wordplay and the sound of words, is surprisingly uninterested. Is uninterested to a surprising degree in puns. He doesn't make that many puns. I'm not saying he never makes puns, but he makes comparatively few puns. Most of the great, the great authors, like the authors for whom the language itself is a kind of playground, right? Who just love to play with English and do these amazing things with English. Like Shakespeare, for instance. Shakespeare never avoided a pun if he could possibly help it, right? He just loves puns because puns are just like the way that when you can take two words which sound exactly the same but mean quite different things and throw them together and just kind of like enjoy the friction and the sparks that kind of emerge when you bring them together, like the ends of live wires, right? And the sparks and things that fly off them. It's almost like a pun is that kind of an experience in Shakespeare, right? He can't help it. He can't stop himself, right, from making these kinds of puns. I agree. Lewis Carroll, very similar, very similar. Yeah. Yeah. And of course, I would add to that list also the brilliant linguistic artist that I have been spending a great deal of my time studying over the last few weeks, Marshall Mathers. Same thing. But anyway, I won't talk about that right now. But Tolkien doesn't make puns very often. It's interesting to me that he doesn't make puns because, again, so many people who are that fascinated in language often do. Anyway, see, exactly, Arthur, like this serious condition with which you are afflicted, Arthur Harrow, is one of the most dedicated punsters I have ever seen on an internet chat screen, and that is saying something, right? You see, Arthur, you're in wonderful company. Anyway, thrashed him in the tuchus. Nancy, you're right. We do see quite a few puns in Farmer Giles, but I wouldn't say, I still wouldn't say that, they're frequent. No, I mean, not like Shakespeare frequent. Shakespeare can be, how many scenes in Shakespeare have no puns at all, right? I'd be super surprised if there were a single Shakespeare play which did not average a pun per scene, like total the number of puns, divide by the number of scenes, like it's going to be more than one, right? He can't help himself. And sometimes like multiple per line, right? It happens in Tolkien, but again, unusually. And a couple people are commenting on how interesting it is that tuchus is a Yiddish expression, which is very interesting. And post 1500, right? And this is, hopefully you're right. This is like the closest thing to a sort of naughty pun, right? I hope you appreciated my feeble attempt at joining in the spirit of the pun with my subtitle there. Anyway, okay. Moving on from the tuchus. And we're running out of time. Whoa, we're really technically out of time. And this is a long passage. Why don't we stop here? Let's stop with the tuchus. How can we do better? Okay. Let's end here. We'll come back to the end. We'll get to Sharky Mark II. And then, of course, finally, Saruman's intervention. You're right, Boomful. We have come to the end of this class. That seems like a perfect note on which to end it, right? Okay. All right. So having arrived at the end of this discussion, we will stop. Okay. Anyway, thanks for joining me. Again, we'll be back 3 weeks from today. So second Wednesday in July, we will return and get through. My goal will be to finish the whole rest of the history of The Lord of the Rings through the epilogue. We'll see how that goes. One quick thing that I wanted to remind you guys of, one thing and then a kind of addendum to that, actually. tomorrow night, Thursday night, we're having Film. Film at its new time. It's going to be in the evenings now, Tuesday or Thursday, alternate Thursdays at 10 p.m. So new time, that will be permanent new time for Film. So that's shifting to weeknights. So if you can join us for that, that would be great. Film is an enormous amount of fun. And the second thing that I would point out, tomorrow night's broadcast, Film broadcast, will be the 500th episode of the Tolkien Professor podcast. I just discovered this like today. I didn't even know that. But yeah, so tomorrow night's recording is going to be episode 500 of the whole Tolkien Professor podcast. So that's going to be kind of awesome. So maybe we'll do something fun. I don't know. I mean, we'll always do something fun because it's film, but maybe we'll do something to celebrate that. Anyhow, thanks everybody for joining me again. See you guys here, Mythgard Academy, second Wednesday in July, and hope to see many of you at Myth Moot. And if you can't make Myth Moot, don't forget Mootcast. See you guys later. Bye now.
The Mythgard Academy has been offering in-depth discussions of awesome books and films since 2013, completely free to attend and free to download. If you've enjoyed our discussions and would like to help them continue, please consider donating at signumuniversity.org/fund.